Welcome to this video introduction to this new SAP code sample that we've just released. The code sample is available on github.com. It's named HANA Developer-CLI-Tool-example. And what I'd like to do with this particular set of sample code is use it to instruct a few different things. First of all, it's a complete finished project basically that is a Node.js based command line interface with some very typical commands that will help support the HANA developer, particularly a HANA developer who maybe isn't using the HANA Studio or the Web IDE and wants to do wants to still be able to interact with the database, but from any other tool, any tool that can basically open command shell or any other command line interface. And the genesis of this was last year. I was doing a lot of work using Visual Studio Code, and I've written some blogs on this in the past where I was interacting with HANA, but I wanted to do that without having to leave the VSCode environment. Sometimes I was working with a HANA database that did not have XSA installed on it, but yet I still wanted to do some HDI-based development, and I had created a few scripts that I used as a shortcut, and I had shared some of those scripts in a blog. But over time, I wanted to more centrally maintain those scripts, make it easier to call them, and my little script library was growing and growing. And I thought, well, why don't I build all these little separate scripts into a single command line tool and make it really reusable and easy to access, and have parameters on the commands and things like that. So what I would like to do with this sample is show you over a series of blogs to accompany these videos, is show you, well, first, how you can build your own command line tool. It was actually, quite simple, particularly with Node.js. I'll go into some of the specifics in a future blog on how to build your own command line tool. What are some of the Node.js modules that are available to help you with prompting and things like that. Then I will show you more specifically how to also interact with HANA from a command line tool, and go into how we built some of the specific commands relative to HANA, and you'll see that in this demonstration video. But the point here, before I start showing you how all of this was built, is I'd like to begin just by showing you the finished product and what it's capable of, to give you some idea of what we'll be building in the future learning materials for this. And of course, it's also, this is a sample. It shows you how to build these sort of things, but there's no reason why you can't use this little tool as well from within your own development. So hopefully it has a little bit of a dual purpose here. So as I said, the tool is a command line based tool. It is all developed in Node.js, which means it's pretty easy to install. I'll show you the process here at the beginning of the video. The idea was not to replace the SQL console. In fact, it has a little bit of functionality to pipe over to hdbsql. But the idea was, as I was writing some of these reusable scripts, it was just to manage them and call them. This was just a more central, easier way to do that, and to formalize and put checks around the input parameters and things like that. The other thing that it does is it can connect to a remote HANA instance, connect to a HANA instance running on your own machine. If you have HANA Express running locally, I've used it in both those scenarios, connecting to HANA as a service on the cloud platform, connecting to a remote HANA system running directly on a cloud provider. For the purpose of this video, I'm going to work with my local HANA Express instance that's running on my laptop. But really everything about how the tool works is the same. And all the security, as you're going to see here, it all uses a mechanism built around the default-env.json file. This isn't something that this tool came up with. This is really how the XSENV module in Node.js works, that when it doesn't find a connection binding in the environment, which would be the case when if you were running within XSA or Cloud Foundry, it will fall back to and look for a file named default-env.json and to get its connection parameters to the HANA database. And a lot of people, even without this tool, they use this for localized testing, being able to run Node.js applications on their local machine and connect to a remote HANA. Just using that as the main way to get the credentials to connect to a remote HANA system or local HANA system. We didn't have to come up with anything different or new. It was all built into the standard SAP Node.js modules for working with HANA. We're just leveraging that here in this tool as well, and in all the examples that I'll show here. But let's see how to get started with the tool. So first of all, you're going to need Node.js installed on your local developer machine. I do already have Node.js installed here. I'm running Node version 12. When I originally started developing this, I was running Node 10, so that's the two versions that I've tested it on and know that it works on. The other thing you're going to need to do to install the tool is we're going to need some SAP Node.js modules like the hdbsql, the XSENV. They're used within this project, so we're going to be able to need to connect to the SAP Node.js registry. And here's the command npm config set to say anything that's in the namespace package SAP, that it redirects from the standard registry to our SAP one. And if I look, I've already configured this. I'm just showing you with the npm command, config ls command, to show you that yes, my SAP registry is already set up to the public npm registry. Now, then you can clone the repository locally, so you have the source code for all these examples. I have already cloned it. So here it is. I've got my source code locally. Next, you would want to run an npm install to pull down any of those dependencies. As you see here, I've got a node modules folder. I've already done this simply because we don't want to sit here in a video and watch the node modules install over a minute or two as they pull down from the internet. But all the dependencies are installed. And then finally, this is the cool little magic that makes this so accessible, is the npm link command. Now, ideally, what you would do is you would if this was a real tool that was fully supported by SAP and everything and not just a sample, we would publish it to npm and you would just be able to do an npm install on it. You'd be able to do npm install -g for global and then say hana-cli, and then you would have the sources pulled down, but then they would also be available globally and you could run them from anywhere in your command line. But what you can do is you can use this npm link command, and what that's going to do when you do that from within the project, it's going to make the command that's exposed by this project, the hana-cli command, and make it available everywhere, almost like it is in your path. It's going to simulate if you had done an npm install globally on this module, but without having to actually package it and put it into an npm registry. So I'll just go ahead and do that. npm link. There we are. It is linking it over. We see it has linked. And now what we can do is, even when I'm not inside this directory, I'll go to a completely different directory. I can issue the hana-cli command. And let me go ahead and just say like version, something simple like that. And it has found its way to that tool. You'll see here that the hana-cli home, where it's actually executing from, is my cloned folder, and then the bin folder within there, that's where the command line starter command is defined. But I can run that from anywhere in my command line. I can come back here to root, for instance, hana-cli. Let's do version again. There we are. Still works. I can go into any other directory that I want here and shoot again. So it's available everywhere. So as I navigate from one project to another, I always have this HANA command line interface available to me. But let's go back here to GitHub. And what you're seeing here is you're also seeing some of the dependencies that are used within this project. You see that, yes, it uses CDS. We'll see more of that later. The HANA client, obviously, to connect to the HANA database, the environment, the security library, and the text bundles. Everything, most everything is language independent, although I've not translated it to other languages. Okay, now that the HANA command line interface is installed, there's not much we can do with it yet because we aren't set up connected to a HANA database. But before we do that, let's create a little new project, as you would do if you were starting some new development here. And I'll just say CDS init bookshop add HANA. And if I go into bookshop, see, it's created a nice project structure for me. Let's say add MTA. Yeah, now I've got an MTA YAML. So I've got a basic starter little CDS project. It does have a DB folder. I don't think we really have much of anything in there yet, but we can, for instance, we can say code bookshop. And this will open it in VSCode for me. Oh, I didn't do that very well, did I? That's code bookshop. There we are. That's what I wanted. Not to open a file named bookshop, but to open the folder. And if we want real quick here, we can go ahead and let's just add one little CDS file. And there we are. Not really going to do too much more than that. And you know, in this point, we could either work in the external shell that I have here. I could also open a terminal inside. This is what I do a lot of times. See, I can issue the same on a CLI. Oh, I didn't want status. I wanted version. There we are. So you see it works here within the terminal inside of VSCode. Works externally. But now that we have a little bit of code, now if you were doing CDS development, a lot of times we'll use the just a local database. We won't connect to HANA immediately. But what I want to do is I want to set it up so we can deploy this to HANA right away. So I want to connect to HANA. I want to create an HDI container instance, but I don't want to go through XSA or Cloud Foundry as service broker to do that. I can do all that from this little tool. But first we need to make an administrative connection to the database. And here we have the command connect. And it's going to ask us for a username and a password. And it will save those credentials into this default-env admin JSON. That way we can issue admin commands, certain commands with an admin flag, and it will use a more powerful user to connect to the database, you know, maybe an HDI admin user. And then the majority of our commands, though, can be issued with the regular container users that are generated by HDI. But let's see how this works. CLI connect. So we want host and our port 890 390 15. Our our user. We're going to go ahead and connect with the system user. This is my private system that only I use, so I'm going to abuse the rights of using system. And the password. Encrypt connections not required. If I was using HANA as a service, then that would be required. There we are. False. No. And what we see here is it has created a default env admin JSON. And actually, I wanted that up here in the. Sorry, I wanted that up here in the DB folder. I should have just been up there. I'll change that in a second. But you also see here that it's connected to my database, connected with this user. Shows me the password in the output. Maybe I shouldn't show that back, but I use this all over the place in demonstrations and exercises anyway. So that's no real secret for my local system. But now I am connected to the HANA database, and I come in here and I do now. If I do HANA CLI status and I say -A to say I want to do this with the admin connection. You see various information like what this user has rights to, that I'm connected to the HANA database. That's the whole idea here, is we're able to just basically run different queries against system views and other tables in HANA, output it directly to the command line, but be able to wrap that in some very easy to use command line prompts and not have to remember like the scripts, separate script names and stuff like that. So really just taking a bunch of stuff that we could have done via scripts from hdbsql and just making it a little easier to call here from the command line. So next we want to create the HDI container without having to go to Cloud Foundry or XSA Cockpit to create instance of the service broker. We can do it all from this command line tool without leaving where we are. It's going to use the default env admin to connect to the database, but then everything after that will use the generated container users. We see the command here, HANA CLI, create container. We can supply a container name. It will automatically default to using the admin connection string to connect to the database. But it will save the generated credentials of the new users and passwords to a default env JSON that all the rest of the connectivity will then use from this point forward. So let's go ahead and come back here and say HANA CLI create container. Create container. And actually, we don't have to supply the container name. It'll prompt us if we don't supply it. So let's say, let's just call it bookshop. And no, we don't need to encrypt. It's creating the container, creating the users, doing all the grants, and then it saved the connection to the default env JSON. And now, you'll see here earlier when I did the HANA CLI status with a -A, it connects as the admin user. See that here in the first part of the output, that it is connected as the system user. But now let's do the HANA CLI status without the -A. So not connected as the admin user. And what we see now, we're connected with a user named bookshop underscore string of characters and numbers underscore RT. So this is the generated runtime user for the database container. And the tool has automatically maintained all this connectivity. This is the same sort of thing if I did a, create service, XS or CF create service of the HANA broker type, and it would create the container and the schema in the database and all the technical users. This command did all the same things, and this would be the environment that would normally be stored in XS or CF, now persisted in the default env JSON, so we can test easily with this with this connection. All right, so let's really put this to use now, and let's build our CDS. And that compiled our schema. It created the HANA specific HDB CDS. And now if we go back to the DB folder and we can run an npm start, and I missed one step here. I ran npm start, but actually our package JSON needs the HDI deployer. So I have to run an npm install first in the DB folder just to pull down the deployer. Sorry about missing that step. And now that I have my prerequisites, I got my HDI deployer installed in this folder. You can see here the start script just calls the HDI deploy command. And if I say npm start, then it will run. And this is basically the same thing as when you do the right mouse click build in the web IDE on a DB folder. That's all it's really doing, is calling the HDI deployer deploy command. We've done the same thing here, and can stop it now that it's done. And you can see that it has connected to the database using our container connection that we created in the previous step from the command line, and deployed all the content to the HANA database inside an HDI container, but we've never left VS Code or the command line interface to do that. Now, not only does this command line interface help you get started with your projects, logging into the system, get containers created, but a lot of what it does is it helps us inspect what's there inside the database. So for instance, I can come here and I can now say hana-cli tables, and it listed all the tables that are in the schema that I'm currently connected to. It defaults to the current schema. I could also say tables -a to connect as an admin, and -c to specify a schema, and let's see all the tables in schema sflight. So we can very quickly introspect the catalog here and see what tables are available. And as you'll see, if you look through the list of commands, there's all kinds of things here. If I do help, you see we have a great many different commands to introspect tables, views, stored procedures, triggers, synonyms, just about any database artifact you can think of. We have the ability to look into here. So let's just go back here to my hana-cli. Let's list the tables. So we see our new table that was created there called Bookshop, and hana-cli inspect table. My bookshop books, and that shows us what the table looks like. So we see the columns that are in the table, their data types, their lengths, and things like that. If you want to some of the table metadata there as well. So very useful thing that you need to do quite often is look into the what makes up a table or a view or something like that. Let's actually look at this hana-cli help table. If we do a -h on the end of command, it shows us all the optional parameters. So yes, we can specify a particular table, we can specify a particular schema. If we don't specify one, it defaulted to the current schema. And we have different output formats. The default was just to show the data in a table, but for instance here I could let's say Spec table, let's say output. Maybe I want to see the SQL commands that would produce this table. Or maybe I want to see this in another format. Maybe I want to see it as it would be, let's say, as JSON. There we see the table definition converted to JSON. And we're using the CDS compiler internally to read the metadata from the table and dynamically turn it into, well, anything else that CDS supports here, really. So we're able to do things like, if you want to see what it would look like converted to EDMX, so the definition as it would be as an OData metadata, converted on the fly, not going through Node.js in this case, or going through the CDS itself, not having to run it in CDS, but doing all this introspection on the fly, really, here. Or if we want to see what it would look like in Swagger, there we are, the Swagger definition of that table exposed as OData. And we can do this. I'm doing this for a CDS entity. So you might think, oh, well, this only works for CDS entities. That is not at all the case. So let's see. Let's look at the sFlight table. And that is a regular catalog table, not defined as CDS at all, but we can basically use the CDS library to dynamically turn it into CDS. I can even show you what the CDS would look like. So what it does is it reads the metadata from the catalog. Even though it's a runtime object that was created with SQL, it converts it on the fly into a CDS representation, and then from there, using the CDS compile command internally, we can turn it into any of the other formats that CDS supports. So this works with views as well. It works with calculation views. So sometimes maybe you want to create a proxy entity in CDS for an existing database artifact. You can use this command to generate that. As you see, it also gives the annotation CDS persistence exists, and then drop this back into your project, and you're good to go there with using this from within the CAP programming model itself. The final little utility that's part of the HANA CLI that I want to show you is the ability to run a table or view in a dynamically generated CDS OData service. Now, don't be confused by the fact that I'm doing this from a project that I started with CDS. We could close this out or go to a completely different folder. It has nothing to do with that. CDS is embedded inside of the HANA CLI tool itself, and it can use it and run a little temporary web server from within the command line on your local machine to expose any existing HANA table or view through CDS and as an OData service. And basically that's this CDS command where you just give it a schema and a table or a view. So what I want to do here, I think this one's really pretty powerful. I'm going to come back here. It's basically the same thing that I gave it for the inspect table, except I'm going to come over here and I'm going to say HANA CLI CDS, connected as an admin, and I still want to do sFlight, the table sFlight in the schema sFlight. So nothing built with CDS, nothing exposed by CDS by default, just an existing catalog table. And when I run this, it takes a second as it analyzes the metadata and it's building a CDS service internally. It opens the CDS preview tool in another browser window, and we've got things like I can come here and I can view the metadata of this service. So it generated an OData endpoint. So of course we've got a metadata document. We can browse the data. Oh, that fell back to our default. I know why that did that. That has to do with the fact that we're inside a container connection here, and then we switched over to an admin connection. Let's try this again with a different connection I had already had prepared. There's maybe a little bug that I could fix there where that didn't act quite right. But so just to repeat, we have our metadata. Yes, our metadata still works. Now when I preview the data, yes, that works. So I'm calling through CDS, an OData service, but notice it's localhost port 3000. This is just running in Node.js on my local laptop, but connecting to the HANA database, even remotely. It could be HANA as a service or HANA Cloud Services, but the OData service is running on my local laptop. I've not had to deploy anything to Cloud Foundry or XSA. I've got a little Swagger UI in here, dynamically generated as well. This is useful if you want to test, like post or patch, delete operations. You can test the OData service here. It's got a nice little interactive UI, so you see the same test results. And just like regular CDS preview, we also have a little Fiori test UI that gets generated. We'll see that here in a second once it comes up. There we are, which shows us our data. We can drill into a particular record. Yes, not super fancy. We're not generating all the annotations with the descriptions and stuff like that, but for a quick little test tool that lets us browse the data and even filter inside of it. So for instance, just give me the records with AA. There they are. So not too bad, starting with a command line tool. No extra installation, no XSA or CF needed. I'm able to browse into the data of an existing catalog table without having to permanently generate anything for this. This OData service is transitory here. Of course, as soon as I stop the command from the command line, then this no longer works. If I come back here now, try to run sflight, yeah, it's gonna trying to connect. Site cannot be reached. It only lived as long as the command was running from the command line. The whole web server was hosted within that running command. So I have many other commands that are out here that we'll look at how we built these, how we built the tool in general, how we built some of these specific commands over some subsequent blogs. I think looking at the code in detail is probably better suited to a blog, but I thought a nice little video here to give you a quick introduction to the tool, what it's capable of, how it works, before we then drill into how it was all built. So I hope you've enjoyed this this look into this HANA command line tool, and that you're looking forward to seeing how it was all built over subsequent blogs.